Hello, everybody. It's Divided We Stand. Friday night, not Saturday night, and not even live. Can't do it tomorrow night. My wife and I have our anniversary, so can't do it. So I'm going to do this recorded show tonight, although in a certain sense it's live because I don't have a script as usual, but this will be a lot shorter. And being that it's a shorter show and I hadn't planned on doing a show, about a half an hour ago I was kind of thinking, well, what am I going to really talk about? I mean, especially if it's a shorter video, you don't want to go too far in depth with anything as far as the news or anything like that. So I think what I'm going to do is just briefly discuss something that I consider somewhat important. At least it ties in with what we normally talk about, and it ties in with my past. And perhaps you will have had the same experience that I've had in my life. And that is this. And if I've kind of touched on this subject before, you'll have to forgive me. So I was watching the news today briefly about what's going on in Russia. And I talk about Russia a lot. And all the problems that we're having with Russia and China. And basically that whole theme of the autocratic countries going against us. And then meanwhile, we have to deal with our internal struggles with the Republican Party and our own autocracies that are budding, so to speak. So, when I was a musician, I used to, experiment with things called modes. They're, collections of notes within a scale, and I would develop chords. And sometimes I'd have some ideas, and I'd write them down. I may even have them cataloged, but I never went as far as taking my ideas and continued them on and on. I didn't. I usually just stopped with it and gave up. And then years and years later, I said, well, it's a shame that I didn't really, focus on my ideas and just go for it and see what happened. And it is a regret. But how that relates to what I'm talking about right now will be a discussion about how when I was, say, 10 or 11, this is during the period that Richard Nixon was president. You know that even then I did watch the news, and I was probably more than a casual observer to the news. I found something, I don't want to say interesting, but I was just almost to the point of being obsessed with watching news, almost to the point where a young kid would watch sports. And quite frankly, I didn't really understand all of it, or even some of it, any more than I did with some of the musical ideas that I had cataloged. But I do remember having this question in my head. I must have been maybe 11 or 12, and I guess there were negotiations between Nixon and Brezhnev. I don't know if they were the START agreements or whatever. But I used to think, as a youngster, why would Brezhnev make deals with Nixon? Of all people, because, I knew that the Republican Party was more militaristic than the Democratic Party. So I at that point, I didn't really understand it all, but what I could understand, or at least I had some concept of, is, why was it that the Russians were so glad, or so accepting of negotiating with someone like Nixon and not work with, say, the left? And I just found it so strange. You know? And you might even think, well, why did, the Iranians deal with Reagan and they didn't deal with Carter? Especially if people thought, that the countries like the Soviet Union and Iran were afraid of the conservatives, that they wouldn't deal with them, or maybe that was the reason why they dealt with them. But that wasn't how I thought of things. I just didn't understand it. I just knew that something was weird about it. So let's push forward to 2023, and I have a much better understanding. At least in my mind, I have a much better understanding why things happen the way they do when we're talking about adversarial relationships between Russia or China and the United States. And now I understand that I had to think more about the other side and what was the greatest threat to them. And of course, the greatest threat to them was people like me, people like you, the progressives, because it was a direct threat, to their, way of doing things. You don't challenge the government. Russia's had that, autocratic viewpoint since Genghis Khan, as has China. So we are a real threat. We're like the French Revolution in waiting. And now I understand. I understand why they were more willing to work with a Nixon than they would be someone like a Humphrey. Try to help Humphrey out. It's almost as if, I guess they felt that, well, we want somebody like us. The real danger to them was not the fact that it was America. The real danger was the progressive element, the democracies that would be perhaps bleeding into their borders. That was their threat. And it's really a shame, because these very people, of course, are in this country now. There are people who have that mentality, and that's a strange thing, that you would have that mentality, that you could talk about freedom all you wanted. Just like I mentioned from Easy Rider, that famous scene with Jack Nicholson. You can talk about freedom. It's a nice word, but in reality, that's not what they want. So there's that struggle. So back to the beginning again. I look at myself now vis-a-vis in my youth, and again I look at the innocence of myself back then, the naivete that I had. But I was on to something. I had no idea what I was on to, but there was a certain thing. And now I'm almost feeling that in a different way when we're talking about the planet itself. I mean, things look bad. I've said, we're so fucked with the situation. It is bad. But there is that little part of me that still exists, as a young man. And I mean somebody who was 11 or 12. That there's just this piece, that me that was experimenting with the scales and trying to come up with some bizarre chords, those kind of things. Just smart enough to be confused, right? There's a piece of me that says, we're going to figure this thing out. Maybe we aren't in trouble, or as much trouble as we think we're in. So I guess I'm trying to be positive in the sense that sometimes that little thought inside your head that that maybe you're right about this, or maybe you're wrong about this, but there's something, this this part of you that questions something. That maybe it won't turn out that way, or maybe it isn't quite what you understand, or it is. But I was on to something then. I was smart enough to be confused about it. Why were they dealing with each other? Why wouldn't they have, tried to negotiate with somebody like Humphrey or something like that, or help them? I was just smart enough to figure that out. And of course, now, like I said, we kind of know, and the lines are drawn, and that's why we have this YouTube channel. That's what they didn't like. They saw freedom as a threat. Just like the journalists who were killed in Russia, and you knew you couldn't have any kind of open journalism in the Soviet Union. Although it's not exactly like that here, if you think about it, they attack CNN, they attack MSNBC, they attack any type of news service that isn't conservative. I mean, I'm not telling you anything new. I wouldn't even begin to try to say that. But over time, I think things, obviously become clear, at least to me. And it's very unfortunate because, I have this, firm understanding that the real problem is the struggle between those who, choose to be free and those who want to hold on to power. And I'm not even talking about what most people call the elite. Because not all the rich are bad. George Soros is not bad. But he has been painted and will be painted as some rich Jews trying to take over the world like the Rothschilds. When in reality, to me, the elite are the powerful. And whether they have the money or they just have the power, whatever it is, they're the real danger. Because, as I guess it was Colonel Cathcart from Catch-22, if it was, he said that the real enemy is, and I'm paraphrasing, the real enemy is anyone who gets you killed. And those kind of people, the powerful people, and again, I'm not just saying the elite, because I think you blur those lines between when somebody says the elite, the far right and the far left will say that, and then you kind of wonder where they're coming from. Who do they really mean by the elite? But let's just say this: the powerful, the ones who hold power, and they don't want to see a free press and democracy, and they want the old ways that go right back to Genghis Khan. They're the real problem. That's the elite I would worry about. And they're not elite. But they're someone who can get you killed. Well, that's it. 12 minutes or so of thinking aloud. I'll be back next week. Knock wood. Sorry I couldn't make it on Saturday. I'm going to chill. And I hope you do too. And keep watching Veg, T-Bone, and Sandy, and all that other kind of stuff. Be well. And I'll see you next time.